I hear their whispers about me. The contemptuous stares, the muffled conversations that cease the moment I enter any space. I notice their reactions, those prim and proper wives gripping their spouses' elbows as though I were some enchantress waiting to spirit their men away. What sort of monster do they imagine me to be? A calculating seductress? A woman devoid of conscience? Someone who manipulates men for personal gain? They'll never grasp the truth. I am Jennifer. A name etched in their memories, a name that makes their blood boil. In their eyes, I'm merely the loathsome stepmother. Their barbs have struck me so frequently that I've grown numb to them. James buried his first wife 2 years ago. Did they expect him to embrace solitude forever? A man of his caliber, affluent, magnetic, isolated, and emotionally raw, was destined to encounter someone like myself. And there I stood, perfectly positioned when fate aligned. They've branded me with countless labels, yet not once have they wondered, what shaped me? What trials forged my path? What sacrifices led me to this moment? None of them care. Because in their narrow minds, women of my ilk don't deserve their own narrative. I refuse to feel remorse for my choices. I recognize my desires, and I've never shied from pursuing them. This life offers no mercy to the timid, and hesitation at crucial moments condemns you to perpetual obscurity. But they, particularly that girl, Linda, believed they could orchestrate my downfall. I wouldn't surrender. That evening remains crystal clear when James announced my ownership of the lake house. We gathered for a family meal, one Linda attended with visible reluctance. I studied her across the table, taking in her precisely trimmed brown locks, those piercing eyes so reminiscent of her mother's. From day one, she'd rejected any possibility of accepting me. But tonight, I possessed something beyond her denial. I lifted my wine glass, relishing the thick tension following James's announcement. Linda placed her cutlery down, her face a masterpiece of composure, neither shocked nor enraged. Instead, she offered a smile, one that sent chills down my spine. "Have you thought this through, Dad?" Her tone was gentle, yet each syllable carried a veiled threat. In that instant, I failed to recognize that this supposed triumph would unravel. I remained oblivious to Linda's carefully laid groundwork. But I refused to let her emerge victorious. Not now, not ever. They label me a fortune hunter, yet remain ignorant of the depths from which I've climbed. I emerged from a small town where girls like me faced a stark dichotomy: surrender to mediocrity or forge their own destiny. My mother, a woman of infinite tenderness and devotion, endured my father's countless betrayals, yet remained tethered to her misery. Her prison? A life devoid of options, burdened with shattered aspirations, and a daughter she struggled to nurture. The image haunts me still, my young self watching her, hands raw and bleeding, scrubbing floors while silent tears traced paths down her cheeks each time my father stumbled home, offering no explanation for his absence. In those moments, I made an unshakable vow: her fate would never become mine. Power, I learned, shields women from betrayal. I mastered the art of reading men early, discerning their desires, understanding their yearnings, and most crucially, identifying the emptiness they desperately needed filled. Then James Bennett crossed my path. His arrival coincided perfectly with my search for a new direction. Previous relationships, all with affluent, influential men, had proven futile. None possessed the patience or naivety to fulfill my true ambitions. To them, I remained merely an ornamental companion, a trophy to parade. I craved more. James stood apart. He embodied old-world nobility, a man who had savored the depths of a meaningful marriage until illness claimed his first wife. His need transcended mere companionship. He sought purpose, a reason to continue breathing. I knew precisely how to become his salvation. From our first encounter, I embodied the quintessential wife: elegant, sophisticated, attentive. Unlike amateur predators, I eschewed aggression. I orchestrated circumstances where James believed he chose me, masking my careful manipulation. That first dinner at his preferred establishment remains vivid, an understated yet refined venue, bathed in soft illumination while classic jazz whispered from distant corners. I sat opposite him, head tilted with calculated precision, absorbing his reminiscences about bygone days, his deceased wife, his unfulfilled aspirations. Age weighs heavier each passing day, James confessed, absently rotating his wineglass. I covered his hand with mine, applying gentle pressure. While time moves forward relentlessly, you alone choose how to spend what remains. With those words, I secured my place in his world. James's love, or his desperate desire to believe in it, was genuine. I provided something invaluable, the sensation of being desired, powerful, eternally youthful, and significant. Yet love alone proved insufficient. I understood that genuine influence required more than emotional connection. Marriage represents more than romance. It's a strategic alliance encompassing advantages, security, and social standing. When I officially became Mrs. James Bennet, I acquired more than a spouse. I stepped into the realm I'd always coveted. I gradually assumed control over his financial empire, his investments, business decisions, and property portfolio. But above all else, the lake house captured my unwavering attention. The property first caught my interest when James casually mentioned it one languid summer day. A heritage estate, perched above crystalline waters, embraced by majestic maples that transformed into a blazing spectacle each autumn. It possessed the perfect blend of seclusion, opulence, and emotional significance to become integral to my strategy. Then Linda entered the picture. My distaste for her was instantaneous. Unlike her privileged peers who frittered away fortunes without comprehension, she possessed a razor-sharp intellect and cautious nature. Most troublingly, she harbored suspicions about me from our first encounter. Linda proved a persistent obstacle. Though she subsisted on her family's wealth, she positioned herself as virtue incarnate. She refused to acknowledge me as her stepmother, maintaining an impenetrable wall between us. The lake house's acquisition necessitated outmaneuvering Linda. It took 2 years of careful manipulation to convince James the property should be mine. Rather than resort to pleading, I orchestrated events to make him believe the decision originated from his own mind. I painted vivid pictures of my vision, transforming the aging structure into a contemporary haven where we could savor our golden years, rather than watching it succumb to time's ravages. His guilt over altering the property was palpable, but I knew patience would eventually yield his acquiescence. Finally, during an elegant dinner with Linda present, James declared the lake house mine. I savored my apparent victory. I had anticipated Linda's dramatic protest, envisioned her hurling her napkin down, rising in fury to denounce my claim to her father. I expected rage, shock, followed by a theatrical exit. Instead, she remained composed. She merely offered a subtle smile. That slight expression instantly triggered my internal alarms. Linda wasn't one to admit defeat. She transcended the naive believers in cosmic justice. She mirrored my own nature more than I'd recognized, calculating, methodical, and masterfully versed in strategic warfare. I maintained my poise as I set down my wine, betraying no hint of concern. "You're certain about this, Dad?" Linda inquired with deceptive lightness. James's irritation manifested in his furrowed brow. "Absolutely certain." She cocked her head slightly, studying me with the calculated precision of a predator preparing its final strike. "Perhaps you should review the documentation," she suggested, casually navigating her phone screen. This morning, Grandmother's trust became active. The property's transfer requires explicit approval from its designated beneficiary. An icy tremor coursed through my body. James turned toward me, bewilderment etched on his features. "What?" Beneath the polished mahogany table, my fingernails carved crescents into my palms as I fought to maintain my composure. "To be perfectly clear, Father," Linda stated, her gaze locked with mine. "The lake house is my inheritance. Not yours to give. Not Jennifer's to claim." I had gravely miscalculated Linda's capabilities. I believed my influence over James was absolute, that his approval would guarantee my desires. But I failed to anticipate his mother's foresight, her decades-long strategy to safeguard the property. A trust fund. Those words tasted bitter. A legal fortress the affluent constructed to protect their wealth from outsiders like myself. Litigation was possible. I could attempt to leverage James's connections to circumvent it. But I wasn't naive. These arrangements were deliberately crafted to be virtually impenetrable. Linda hadn't merely triumphed, she'd orchestrated my complete strategic defeat. Yet surrender had never been in my nature. I manufactured a delicate smile, raising my crystal wine glass with practiced elegance, as if this revelation were merely an entertaining diversion. How fascinating, I purred, my tone dripping honey. Our clever girl came armed with strategy. Linda remained stoic. She recognized this battle was far from concluded. Grandmother intended the house to remain within the bloodline, Linda declared. Not surrendered to an outsider. My eyebrow arched delicately. An outsider? I released a melodic laugh. Darling, I'm your father's wife. That makes me family. Linda regarded me with calculated precision, weighing each syllable. Blood runs deeper than marriage certificates, she countered. Her words ignited something primal within me. 3 years I'd invested, meticulously crafting the persona of the devoted wife. I'd weathered James's darkest moments, orchestrated his continued sense of purpose. Now this entitled child dared invalidate my position in this family? The urge to douse her in burgundy wine, to unleash my fury at her privileged presumption, nearly overwhelmed me. But I couldn't falter. True power demands emotional restraint. James attempted reconciliation. Linda, this isn't necessary, he interjected wearily. The house isn't worth this discord. Not worth it. Linda's derision was palpable. Can't you see? Grandmother dedicated her life to preserving this legacy. Now you're willing to surrender it to someone who shares none of our history. My fingers constricted around the sterling silver fork, knuckles whitening with suppressed rage. No genuine attachment? I echoed, carefully modulating my voice. That house means everything to me, Linda. I envisioned transforming it into something extraordinary, a sanctuary where our family could create memories. A property you could renovate and flip for a fortune, Linda interjected. My breath caught. She'd uncovered it. She knew my intentions. I veiled my shock with a practiced smile. You truly believe I'm that desperate for financial gain? Linda reclined in her seat, arms folded across her chest. Perhaps not. But you crave control. And that house was integral to your strategy. It was crystal clear now. Linda had orchestrated this entire confrontation. She'd been several moves ahead from the beginning. Silence descended upon the room momentarily. James appeared drained, while Linda maintained the satisfied demeanor of someone who'd just executed a perfect checkmate. But I never concede until the final piece falls. Rising gracefully, I smoothed the creases from my dress before placing my wine glass on the table with deliberate precision. Well, I remarked, meeting Linda's gaze directly. I clearly misjudged your capabilities. She remained silent, maintaining that knowing expression. I shifted toward James, resting my hand possessively on his shoulder. Perhaps we should continue this discussion in private, my love, I suggested, my tone laden with implication. I sensed Linda's scrutiny, but it hardly mattered. This war was far from concluded. And victory would be mine, whatever the price. I'd believed triumph was certain. I'd anticipated Linda's meltdown, envisioned her furiously flinging her napkin aside, leaping to her feet, berating her father about my audacity to claim the lake house. I expected rage, shock, followed by a dramatic exit. Instead, she remained perfectly composed. She simply sat there, smiling. Though subtle, that smile instantly triggered my instincts. Linda wasn't one to yield gracefully. She didn't subscribe to idealistic notions of justice prevailing. She possessed qualities I'd overlooked: cunning, patience, and most crucially, strategic brilliance. I set down my wine glass with measured control, maintaining an impeccable facade, never betraying a hint of disquiet. Are you certain about this, Dad? Linda inquired, her tone deceptively light. James's irritation showed plainly. Absolutely certain. She canted her head slightly, studying me with the calculated focus of a predator preparing its decisive strike. I had gravely miscalculated Linda's capabilities. I'd been convinced I held sway over James, believing his approval would guarantee my desires. But I'd failed to anticipate his mother's foresight, her decades-long strategy to safeguard that property. A trust fund. The phrase made my blood boil. A legal fortress the wealthy constructed to protect their assets from individuals like myself. Litigation was an option. I could attempt to persuade James to leverage his influence against it. But I wasn't naive. These legal structures were deliberately designed to be virtually impenetrable. Linda hadn't merely succeeded, she'd orchestrated a victory I couldn't possibly overturn. Yet surrender wasn't in my nature. I offered a delicate smile, lifted my wine glass with practiced elegance, and gave it a refined swirl, as if this revelation were merely an entertaining diversion. How fascinating, I purred, my voice dripping with honey. Our clever girl came armed with strategy. Linda remained stoic. She recognized this battle was far from concluded. Grandma's wish was for the house to remain within the bloodline, Linda stated, not in the possession of an outsider. I arched one perfectly manicured eyebrow. An outsider? I released a melodic laugh. Darling, I'm your father's wife. That makes me family. Linda regarded me contemplatively, weighing each syllable of my response. Blood runs deeper than marriage certificates, she countered. Her words ignited a dangerous flame within me. 3 years I'd devoted to James, meticulously crafting the persona of the ideal spouse. I'd weathered his darkest moments, done everything conceivable to preserve his sense of worth. Now this entitled child dared to invalidate my position in this family. The urge to douse her with wine, to rise and denounce her as a privileged princess who'd never known true struggle, was overwhelming. But I restrained myself. True power lies in emotional control. James attempted to ease the mounting tension. Linda, this isn't necessary, he interjected wearily. The house isn't worth this conflict. Not worth it. Linda's derision was palpable. Have you forgotten Grandma's lifelong dedication to protecting it? Now you're willing to surrender it to someone who shares none of our history. My grip tightened around my fork until my knuckles whitened. None of your history? I echoed, maintaining remarkable composure. I cherish that house, Linda. I had grand visions for its transformation, creating a haven for our family too. A property ripe for renovation and resale at a premium, Linda interjected. My composure wavered momentarily. She had deciphered my intentions. She had uncovered my strategy. I concealed my shock behind a practiced smile. Are you suggesting I'm motivated purely by financial gain? Linda reclined in her seat, arms folded across her chest. Perhaps not. But you crave influence. And that property was instrumental to your agenda. It was unmistakable now. Linda had orchestrated this confrontation with calculated precision. She had arrived fully prepared. The atmosphere grew thick with tension. James appeared drained, while Linda emanated the quiet confidence of a strategist who had just executed a masterful play. But I never concede while possibilities remain. Rising gracefully, I smoothed the creases from my dress before deliberately placing my wine glass on the table with an audible click. Well, I remarked, meeting Linda's gaze directly. I clearly misjudged your capabilities. She maintained her silence, that knowing expression unwavering. I shifted toward James, placing a possessive hand on his shoulder. Perhaps we should continue this discussion in private, my love, I suggested, my tone laden with implication. I sensed Linda's scrutiny, but remained undeterred. This confrontation was far from concluded. And I refused to accept defeat, whatever the cost. I never enter conflict without contingency plans. True, Linda had executed a clever maneuver, catching me unprepared. But that didn't signal my defeat. Throughout my life, I had never accepted failure in any contest, particularly not in this crucial battle. The game continued. I simply needed to devise a superior strategy. I dedicated the entire night to analyzing the trust fund's details. I'm not someone who relies solely on superficial charms for advancement. I had mastered the art of operating within the framework of the powerful, understanding that legal systems themselves could serve as weapons. James wielded significant financial authority within the family. Despite Linda's trust fund advantage, with careful manipulation of James, legal alternatives might emerge. The following morning, I guided James to his study with calculated sweetness, where I had meticulously arranged relevant documentation. I poured his coffee with care, massaging his shoulders, a familiar gesture I knew he found comforting. "James," I began, my voice gentle yet purposeful, "have you explored every avenue to modify this arrangement?" James shook his head wearily. "I've consulted our attorney. My mother's trust is ironclad. Any attempt to alter it could constitute fraud." I feigned thoughtful concern, biting my lip. "It seems unjust. As your wife, shouldn't we make these decisions together about the property?" I noticed uncertainty flicker across James's features. He despised this tension. While he desired harmony between Linda and me, his aversion to conflict ran even deeper. "I'll speak with the attorney once more." James exhaled heavily, "though I can't guarantee any changes." I offered a tender smile, my fingers trailing along his jawline. "I have complete faith in you, James. If dismantling the trust proved impossible immediately, I would employ an alternative strategy: psychological manipulation." Linda, despite her intelligence, harbored one significant vulnerability: she couldn't withstand familial discord. Her upbringing with her deceased mother had been idyllic. She held unwavering faith in the father-daughter connection, certain that James would invariably support her position. But if I could plant seeds of doubt in that certainty, she would eventually falter. I initiated my psychological campaign with subtlety. I began weaving doubts into James's consciousness about Linda's apparent emotional distance. "Of course she cherishes you," I murmured into his ear one evening as he nursed his whiskey on the terrace. "But perhaps she fails to recognize your right to pursue happiness." James remained silent, but I recognized his contemplative state. I continued nurturing those seeds of doubt. During every confrontation between Linda and James regarding the property, I maintained a strategic distance, allowing James to exhaust himself, ensuring he perceived me as his sole source of understanding. Then came my calculated masterstroke. When James returned from work one afternoon, I carefully crafted my appearance, eyes deliberately reddened, suggesting recent tears. His concern was immediate. "Jennifer, what's troubling you?" I clasped his hand with deliberate gentleness. I paused, feigning emotional struggle. "I feel like an outsider here." James's brow furrowed. "Explain what you mean." "Linda despises me," I replied, allowing my voice to quaver. "Despite my endless efforts to build bridges, she remains closed off. Now she's even denying me my own space in this home." James averted his gaze, sighing deeply. I detected his resolve weakening. "I'm not asking you to choose sides," I whispered, "but existing in a family that rejects me feels unbearable." His slumped shoulders signaled my impending victory. I had exhausted every legal avenue. I had manipulated emotions skillfully. But if these approaches proved insufficient, I wouldn't stop there. Eliminating Linda from the equation became imperative. A sinister thought crystallized in my mind. While extreme measures weren't my preference, I never dismissed effective solutions. I contemplated orchestrating a minor incident, nothing fatal, but sufficient to destabilize Linda. Perhaps a stumble? A minor vehicular collision? Something to shatter her composure? I maintained connections who could arrange such matters. My involvement would remain untraceable. Everything would appear entirely accidental. However, James unexpectedly altered everything. One evening, as I refined my strategy, he entered my study and placed an envelope before me. "I've given this considerable thought, Jennifer," he spoke, his voice laden with exhaustion and finality. I unfolded the envelope's contents. Divorce papers stared back at me. My body turned to stone. James met my gaze, his eyes swimming with remorse. "This has to stop. Linda is my flesh and blood. The house isn't negotiable. And I believe we need to part ways." The reality before me seemed impossible to process. After everything, he was choosing his daughter over me? But this wouldn't be the finale. I refused to accept such an ending. My fingers tightened around the papers as I drew a measured breath. 3 years of meticulously crafting my position, I wouldn't allow it to disintegrate in one evening. The game pieces remained in play, and defeat wasn't an option, whatever the price. Never had I imagined my narrative would conclude this way. I once believed I orchestrated everything, each syllable, every choice James made, all my strategic moves against Linda. But the game board had transformed unexpectedly. Staring at the divorce documents, an unfamiliar sensation coursed through me. Not anguish. Not disbelief. Pure, smoldering fury. The betrayal from James seemed unfathomable. His daughter had won his loyalty. I studied James, the man I'd spent 3 years molding, shaping into someone who couldn't exist without me. I'd orchestrated everything to become his essential companion. I'd weathered others' disapproval, his daughter's hostile glares, patiently awaiting my moment of ultimate triumph. And this was my reward? Legal documents and an inadequate expression of regret? Have you reached this decision with absolute certainty? I inquired, maintaining composure. James exhaled heavily, feigning difficulty. But I recognized the truth. This choice hadn't challenged him significantly. If his proclaimed love had been genuine, he wouldn't have discarded me so readily at his daughter's behest. Jennifer, this benefits us both, he stated, avoiding eye contact. Benefits us both? No, this served Linda's interests alone. I searched desperately for legal remedies, ways to reverse the situation. Despite consulting numerous attorneys, the verdict remained unchanged. Nothing could be contested. My attempts to reason with James proved futile. He'd completely aligned with his daughter. My words no longer reached him. I made one final attempt to confront Linda. Perhaps she desired more than mere victory. But entering her room, I encountered only her triumphant smirk. "It's time to concede, Jennifer," she declared, her tone deceptively light yet mocking. My hands balled into fists. "Your father might forgive your calculated dismissal of the woman who stood beside him in his darkest hours," I stated, my voice sharp as ice. "But remember this, loyalty isn't infinite, Linda." I searched her face for a crack in her armor, a moment of uncertainty that would reveal I'd touched a sensitive chord. Nothing surfaced. With casual indifference, Linda shrugged. "Think what you will. You're no longer my concern." The message was clear. In her world, I had become yesterday's story. I've never been one to exit quietly. If James was determined to erase me from his life, there would be a price to pay. I placed a manila folder on his mahogany desk. "I'll agree to the divorce," I announced deliberately. "With conditions." James's brow furrowed. "Is this blackmail?" A laugh escaped my lips as I shook my head. "Not blackmail, James. Justice. 3 years of my life deserve compensation." I'd meticulously collected evidence of his questionable business ventures, deals that could spell disaster if revealed. I wasn't leaving this marriage empty-handed. James recognized the implications. After brief resistance, he yielded. I lost James. The lake house slipped away. But I secured my consolation prize. On my final day at the Bennett estate, Linda watched from the entrance steps, arms crossed, her eyes devoid of compassion. I met her gaze unflinchingly. "Savor your triumph," I said smoothly. "But never presume superiority." She remained silent. As I slipped into my car, dark glasses concealing my expression, I felt Linda's scrutiny following me. I knew she viewed me as defeated. But her opinion meant nothing. James had chosen his blood ties. Linda had claimed this victory. Yet my story wasn't finished. This was merely one chapter's end. This game might be over, but my campaign had just begun. They label me the antagonist, the fortune hunter, the woman without shame. But would those judgments hold if you knew my complete story? Could you consider an alternative narrative? If you'd navigated my world, where women's power came only through their own determination, would your choices differ? Would you meekly accept fate's decisions? Or would you fight for what you believed you deserved? Yes, Linda emerged victorious. The world sees her as virtuous. But consider this, can she truly claim moral high ground when she manipulated her father, using him as a piece in her strategic game? If she employed every possible tactic to remove me from James's life, how does that distinguish her from me? And in matters of the heart, what's truly paramount? Authentic feelings? Or the strength to protect oneself? Was I truly deserving of this fate? Or simply a woman navigating a world designed to resist my survival? If my story resonates, press like. For more tales from those branded as villains, hit subscribe. Share your thoughts. Where do your loyalties lie? Choose your side. Are you with Jennifer the survivor or Linda the privileged?